Coming soon from SJS Direct, Spellbound, a darker shade of black. When I examine the behaviors of these Islamic terrorist groups like your Al Qaeda and your ISIL, they all seem to have a very interesting pattern. In all of their acts of violence, they always seem to target white people. And when I think about that, it's very interesting to me. Your Islamic terrorists pretty much say they are committing these acts of violence in the efforts to get people scared. And on the other side, they say they want to do these things because they want to build an Islamic state. When you listen to their ideologies, they're just not logical. How is getting people scared going to help you in your efforts towards building this so called Islamic State, this perfect place that Muslims will be able to go to? These two concepts just don't reconcile with each other. When you really think about it, terrorism in and of itself is not a constructive course of action if you want to build. Getting people scared does not help you build a nation. When it comes down to war, wars are primarily fought for economic reasons. People go to war because they see profits in it from the long term, from taking assets from another nation. However, when we look at terrorism, it's just a group of random guys blowing up stuff or shooting people in the name of a so called God or a so called religion. And how does that work overall towards building a nation? Again, the two concepts don't reconcile with each other because war is about economics, nation building is about economics, and you have to have a strategy that's effective in order to do that. You have to build economic allies and political allies if you hope to build a nation. So when I listen to these Islamic terrorists sit there and talk about how they're going to build this Islamic state, all of their actions pretty much show me they really have no interest in building a so-called Islamic state. And I go back to the Afghanistan conflict in the late 1990s, early 2000. Now, you had your Osama bin Laden. He had political allies with the Taliban. And a lot of people didn't like the Taliban, but they were political allies that they could have worked together towards building a Islamic state. You had your Osama bin Laden, who had billions of dollars. And you had several governments, including the United States government, that wanted to work with them towards building Afghanistan. However, what does your Osama bin Laden do? Instead of working towards building that nation, that Islamic State that Al Qaeda says it wanted so badly, no, what he does is he goes out and plans 9/11. How does planning 9/11 help you towards building your Islamic State? When you think about that, you go, there's something truly wrong here when it comes down to these terrorists. And the same thing with your ISIL. They're saying that they want to build an Islamic State. But when you look at their whole propaganda arm, it's all about committing acts of violence towards white people. And when you look at that, you go, why is everything about white people? If you're about building an Islamic State, you want to go and just go build your Islamic State. Simple as that. That doesn't require anybody else. Because I look at post-World War II Japan, and the Japanese went and rebuilt Japan. Yes, they had some U.S. help and economic and trade partners, but they went and rebuilt Japan, and Japan was more competitive at one time than the U.S. And the Chinese, pretty much, they've had wars, and they pretty much focus on building China up. They're not focused on random acts of violence in the hopes of getting attention for a political cause, because they understand that politics is nothing without economics. And when you look at your Islamic State and you look at your former Al Qaeda, they were pretty much all about random acts of violence to get people scared, to get people intimidated. And that does not help you build a nation. Building a nation requires, again, building trade routes, having assets that can be traded back and forth, having economic resources, having economic allies such as China and Russia in that region of Afghanistan. Though that's what and the Saudis and other Middle Eastern countries. That's how you build a nation. You can't build a state based on a concept like religion. And when you look at the reason that they have for building this so-called Islamic State ISIL and Al-Qaeda had regarding that, that also falls apart because they're talking about this whole foundation of something based on something called Sharia law. But when you break that Sharia law apart, you really see that it's really about monolithic thought, because that's what a lot of these terrorists really want. They want people to follow their interpretation of Islam, and they want everyone to follow that one interpretation of Islam. And that's just not possible because God gave every human being their own mind and their own free will. So you're never going to have monolithic thought in any sort of country, and you're not going to be able to run a country on a religion, because religions don't create jobs, they don't build infrastructure, they don't give you trade partners, they don't give you political partners, and they don't help you build alliances that will help you build a strong nation. You cannot build these things with a religion, and you cannot build them when you're trying to create a political system where everything is based on terrorism and violence, because that's just not going to help you create a stable country and a safe country. It's just the whole concept that these terrorists use pretty much contradicts all their ideas regarding their goals. I mean, they're saying that, again, you want an Islamic State, but you can't have an Islamic State because, one, religion does not build an economy. Two, your attempts to attack people pretty much are getting you the wrong type of attention, because when you commit an act of terror, you're not going to be able to build the alliances you need to get the trade partners and economic allies you're going to need to build a nation. And three, when it comes down to terrorists, a lot of these guys pretty much have no direction, because everybody is just focusing on trying to get the attention of white people. And that's what they really want, is the attention of these white people. Because when you look at these Islamic terrorists, when they say that they serve God, we see which God they truly serve by the people who they go after to attack in these acts of violence. They rarely ever go after anybody outside. When they rarely ever go outside of people in their own race, except in their own country, when they disagree with them. And when they do this, it pretty much shows us that this really isn't about building anything. It's really about getting the attention of white people. When I look at your ISIL, primarily, they show that they pretty much really want to get the attention of these white men, primarily with all those beheadings. Because when they had a chance to do the exact same thing to this white woman, because they had a white woman hostage, they pretty much backed away and said, she was killed in a bombing. Which pretty much shows us that their whole agenda is about destroying this white man that they hate so much. The same white man that in some ways I say that they're pretty much deifying and putting on a pedestal, because why are you continuing to try to seek his attention? If you wanted to build a nation, you would go out and make efforts to build your own nation, build your own economic partners, get your trade partners, because you cannot run a nation on religion alone. Nations run on money. Nations run on trade. Nations run on commerce. And sadly, none of these American politicians or Western politicians is trying to attack the terrorists in a constructive manner. When you look at their actions, primarily, they're trying to bomb these guys when it's time for a different approach. And one of the approaches that I would go for is to attack their ideology and to deconstruct it so that people will understand that your Islamic terrorist is pretty much seeking attention from white people and trying to seek the approval of white people. They're really not about building any sort of nation. They want to, all of this is just basically like a temper tantrum. I'm trying to get his attention. I'm trying to get these white people's attention, and they lack the business skills or social skills to understand how to build a relationship with the white people they say they hate so much. Because all this terrorism is just, again, another way to get their attention. Because if you really were about nation building, you would do what the Japanese have done, the Chinese have done, South Americans have done, and just build your own nation and use the tools to go about building that nation and then creating a better marketplace for yourself. Because if these people say that they hate the West so much, then create an economy that is strong enough to facilitate taking all these people and turning them into workers who create businesses that pretty much rival that of the West, and pretty much create an Islamic nation that can pretty much compete like that. But that, again, that's not going to be possible because economies don't run on religion, and terrorists don't really care about economics. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.